Hello, Magic players and collectors. Welcome back to the Land Library. I'm your librarian, and in this episode of Latest Loadout, I'm covering the next backlog set, Lost Caverns of Ixalan. This set released on October 17th of 2023, and as is pretty apparent from the name, it's set on Ixalan. It continues Ixalan's story from when long-forgotten caves and tunnels to the core are unearthed, which is highly relevant to the lands in this set. Also, being an Ixalan set, there's plenty of lands that transform from other things, so this might be a long one, and I'll just get right into it. You all know what's coming first, it's the basics. There are two prints of regular basics and a set of full arts, which are very stylized. I like them a lot. But that's not all, because released as a bonus insert in this set was a Universes Beyond mini-set of Jurassic World cards, including another full set of full art basics that also are double-sided. Also in the Jurassic World set is a beautiful command tower, which of course taps for a mana of any color in your commander's color identity, and is double-sided too, just like those basics. Interestingly, this is one of the very few times where Command Tower can be pulled in packs, but Command Tower doesn't quite end there because there's also a print in the Commander set, but it just has one of the classic Command Tower arts. If it wasn't for the Jurassic World Command Tower, this print would have just been shoved down in rapid fire. Moving on, Cavern of Souls makes its return with all new art. This is an iconic land that chooses a creature type when it enters, and can either tap for a colorless or tap for a mana of any color, only to be spent on casting a creature with the chosen type, with the added bonus of making it uncounterable. And they went pretty wild with prints, giving it a borderless art in both regular packs and collector packs, and then 5 neon ink versions of the borderless only in collector packs, each with varying rarities. Although all extremely rare to begin with, they go in order of least rare to most rare, with green, blue, purple, red, and then the multicolor. But there's still one more print, a yellow neon ink borderless, as a promo. And there's a few lands in the Commander set returning with new art as well, such as Canopy Vista, the Selesnya Battle Land, so it has basic subtypes, specifically forest and plains, giving it all the added benefits like tapping for green or white, and otherwise just comes in tapped unless you control at least 2 basics. Then Clifftop Retreat, another land that checks for basics in play, or, well, basic types instead of a number of basics, so it enters untapped if you control a mountain or plains, and then can, of course, tap for either a white or a red mana. And the dual colors keep coming with Tainted Field, which is obviously a tainted land, so it can tap for a colorless mana or tap for a white or black mana if you control a swamp. Interestingly, this is the first time any of the tainted lands have ever gotten new art, and all 4 would get new art in the Fallout set, which comes later, like after this one, but other than that, this is actually still the only one. Following those dual colors is another land that cares about basics, but in a much different way, Evolving Wilds, which taps and sacks to search your library for a basic and put it in play tapped and then shuffle. Now it's time for one of those transforming lands I brought up in the intro, Treasure Map, with a casting cost of 2 generic, and can pay a generic to tap for a scry and put a landmark counter on it. Then, if it has 3 or more landmark counters, it removes them, transforms, and makes 3 treasure tokens. It transforms into Treasure Cove, which can tap for a colorless or tap and sack a treasure for a draw. Now, one last land before rapid fire, Growing Rights of Itlamok. This is a legendary enchantment costing 2 generic and a green that has you look at the top 4 cards of your library when it enters, and you can choose to reveal a creature you find there to put in your hand, with the rest, or all if you didn't reveal anything, going to the bottom of your library. Then at the beginning of your end step, it checks if you have 4 or more creatures, and if so, it transforms. As a land, it can tap for a green mana, or tap for a number of green mana equal to the number of creatures you control. This card does come with an extended art version, but it only affects the art on the front of the card, not the land. So I will kinda just be ignoring any other extended arts like this, because there are several. Now, onto the rapid fire, we've got Alchemist's Refuge, Arch of Orazca, Bojuka Bog, Choked Estuary, Cinderglade, Crumbling Necropolis, Desolate Lighthouse, Exotic Orchard, Foreboding Ruins, Fortified Village, Frostboil Snarl, Fury Calm Snarl, Game Trail, Gaia Reach Sanitarium, Hinterland Harbor, Isolated Chapel, Jungle Shrine, Karn's Bastion, Kessig Wolf Run, Llanowar Reborn, Mosswarp Bridge, Myriad Landscape, Nephalia Drownyard, Orzhov Basilica, Path of Ancestry, Port of Carfel, Reliquary Tower, Rogue's Passage, Secluded Courtyard, Shine Shadow Snarl, Simic Growth Chamber, Smoldering Marsh, Sulphur Falls, Sunken Hollow, Temple of Mystery, Temple of Silence, Temple of the False God, Terramorphic Expanse, Thriving Bluff, Thriving Grove, Thriving Heath, Thriving Isle, Thriving Moor, Unclaimed Territory, Vault of the Archangel, Fine Glimmer Snarl, Voldaren Estate, and Windbrisk Heights. This set has quite a few new lands, including multiple different cycles, so let's start with the Restless Lands. These are a cycle of allied colored dual man lands, all including Restless in their name, which enter tapped, tap for either of their colors, and transform into creatures for the turn, but the transformations are all unique. Restless Vents transforms into a 2/3 insect with Menace for a generic, a red, and a black, and whenever it attacks, you can draw a card and discard a card. Restless Ridgeline transforms into a 3/4 dinosaur for 2 generic, a red, and a green, and whenever it attacks, it untaps another attacking creature and gives it +2/+0 until end of turn. Restless Reef transforms into a 4/4 shark with Death Touch for 2 generic, a blue, and a black, and whenever it attacks, target player mills 4 cards. Restless Prairie transforms into a 3/3 llama for 2 generic, a green, and a white, and whenever it attacks, other creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. And lastly, Restless Anchorage transforms into a 2/3 bird with flying, and whenever it attacks, you create a map token. Also, all of these have a borderless print, and these look pretty nice. The next cycle are transforming lands too, but this time they start as creatures and transform into lands on the back. All 5 are legendary god creatures that transform into temples when they die, but otherwise are also pretty unique. These have very difficult names to pronounce, so I'll just refer to them by color, starting with the green one. This one costs 3 generic and 2 green to cast, and is a 6/5 with trample. It also has an ability that whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may look at the top number of cards of your library equal to the damage dealt, and put a creature and or a land from among them onto the battlefield. Then put the rest on the bottom of your library. This transforms into Temple of Cultivation, which can tap for a green or at sorcery speed while you control 10 or more permanents. You can pay 2 generic and a green to tap and transform it back into the creature on the other side. The red one costs 2 generic and 2 red to cast. It's a 4/4 with trample and has the ability that if a red source of non-combat damage would do less damage than its power to an opponent, it does damage equal to its power instead. It transforms into Temple of Power, which can tap for a red, or at sorcery speed, if red sources you control have done at least 4 damage, you can pay 2 generic and a red to tap and transform it back. The black one, which I actually can pronounce, it's Aklazat's Deepest Betrayal, which has a casting cost of 3 generic and 2 black, is a 4/4 with lifelink and flying, and has the ability that every time it attacks, each opponent discards a card, and if anyone can't discard any cards, you draw a card for each opponent that couldn't discard this way. And another ability that whenever an opponent discards a land specifically, you create a 1/1 flying bat token creature. It transforms into Temple of the Dead, which can tap for a black or at sorcery speed. If any player has only 1 or 0 cards in hand, you can pay 2 generic and a black to tap and transform it back. Now, the blue one, with a casting cost of 2 generic and 2 blue, it's a 4/3 with flying, and the ability that whenever you cast an instant from your hand, it gets rebound. And just like the other 4, when it dies, it transforms. However, unlike the other 4, It transforms with 3 time counters on it. It transforms into Temple of Cyclical Time, which can tap to make a blue mana and remove a time counter, or at sorcery speed, as long as there are no time counters on it, you can pay 2 generic and a blue to tap and transform it back. And then the white one, which has a casting cost of 4 generic and 2 white, and is a 6/6 with vigilance and the ability that if any token creatures would be made under your control, 3 times that many are created instead. It transforms into Temple of Civilization, which can tap for a white, or at sorcery speed, if you attacked with at least 3 creatures this turn, you can pay 2 generic and a white to tap and transform it back. All of these also have a special showcase version, which includes different art on both sides. It has the cool showcasey version on the front, and murals from inside the temples as the land art on the backs. And for the next cycle, we've got another set of transforming lands, this time that are legendaries on both sides, which is 6 instead of the normal 5 because it includes a colorless one, although the green one, Growing Rights of Itlamok, is not new, so it kinda goes back to being 5. Starting with Brass's Tunnel Grinder, this is an artifact with a casting cost of 2 generic and a red. When it enters, you can discard any number of cards you want and then draw the same number plus 1. Then, at the beginning of your end step, you put a boar counter on it if you descended during the turn. And then if there's 3 or more boar counters on it, you remove them and transform into Tekoltlan, the Searing Rift, which is a legendary cave. Oh boy, that's right, that's a new subtype. I've definitely talked about caves before on this channel, but this is the set that introduced it. But back to the card, as a land, it can tap for a red, and whenever that mana is spent on casting a permanent, you discover equal to the permanent's mana value. Next up, Tarian's Journal, which is also an artifact and has a casting cost of 1 generic and a black. It can tap to sack a creature or artifact to draw a card, but this is at sorcery speed. Or, for 2 generic, it can tap to discard your hand and transform it into the Tomb of Aclazotz. This land is also a cave and can tap for a black, or can tap to let you cast a creature from your graveyard this turn, but you still have to pay its casting cost, and it gains Vampire in addition to its other types, and has a finality counter on it. Now the blue one, the Ever-Flowing Well, with a casting cost of 2 generic and a blue, which, when it enters, you mill 2 cards and draw 2 cards. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have at least 8 permanent cards in your discard, it transforms into the Myriad Pools. This is not a cave, and instead is an artifact land, which can tap for a blue, and whenever you spend that mana on casting a permanent, you can make another target permanent you control into a copy of that one you cast until the end of turn. Then the white one, Thousand Moons Smithy, with a casting cost of 2 generic and 2 white. This is yet another artifact, and when it enters, it creates a Gnome Soldier creature token with power and toughness equal to the number of creatures and artifacts you control. And it transforms by tapping 5 artifacts or creatures during your pre-combat main phase into Barracks of the Thousand. This is another artifact land, and it taps for a white, and whenever you spend that mana on casting a creature or artifact, you create another one of those Gnome Soldier tokens. Now, for the colorless one, which probably isn't technically part of the cycle, but is still a rare legendary artifact transforming into a legendary land, so close enough. It has a casting cost of 3 generic, and can tap to draw a card, then discard a card, or if there's 4 or more permanent types in your graveyard, you can pay 4 generic to tap and transform it into the Core, which simply taps for X mana of any one color, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. Then just one last cycle before the individual lands, the Hidden Caves. These are all subtype cave, enter tapped, tap for their color, and at sorcery speed, for 4 generic and 1 of their color, they tap and sack to discover 4. Nice and easy cycle because they all do the exact same thing, just in different colors. So, on to the individuals. Let's start with the transforming ones, such as Twists and Turns, an enchantment with a single green casting cost that makes a creature explore when it enters, and also makes it so whenever a creature explores, you also scry one first. Then, when a land enters under your control, if you have 7 or more lands, it transforms into Mycoid Maze, which is a cave, and it taps for a green, or for 3 generic and a green. It taps to look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal a creature from among them and put it in your hand, and put the rest, or all, if you revealed nothing, on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, Dowsing Device, an artifact with a casting cost of a generic and a red, that when it or another artifact enters under your control, you can give a target creature +1/+0 and haste until the end of turn. Then it checks if you have 4 or more artifacts, and if you do, it transforms into Geode Grotto, a cave that taps for a red mana, or for 2 generic and a red, it taps to give a creature +X/+0 and haste until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. And for one last transforming land, Grasping Shadows. This is an enchantment with a casting cost of 2 generic and a black that gives a creature you control that's attacking alone Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn, and adds a dread counter to itself. Then checks if it has 3 or more dread counters, and if it does, it transforms into Shadow's Lair, which is a cave and not a lair, that can tap for a black, or you can pay a black and tap to remove a dread counter to draw 1 card and lose 1 life. And we're finally done with the transforming lands. In the main set, that is, because there's also one in the Jurassic World cards. Probably didn't think that'd be coming up again, but there's a saga called Welcome To, with a casting cost of a generic and 2 green, with the first chapter making a non-creature artifact you control into a 0/4 wall with Defender equal to the number of opponents until the saga leaves the battlefield. Then Chapter 2 makes a 3/3 dinosaur creature token with Trample and gives it haste until end of turn, and Chapter 3 destroys all walls, not even just your own, just all of them, and exiles itself to return it transformed as Jurassic Park. As a land, it can tap for a green mana equal to the number of dinosaurs you control, and gives all dinosaurs in your graveyard escape, with the escape cost being its normal casting cost, and exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard. Now we're finally done with all the transforming lands for real, so on to Captivating Cave. This land is a cave that can tap for a colorless, filter a generic into any color, or at sorcery speed, you can pay 4 generic to tap and sack it, and put 2 1/1 counters on a target creature. Then Pit of Offerings, which is a cave that enters tapped and exiles up to 3 cards from any graveyard, and then can tap for any color of any of the cards it exiled, or just tap for a colorless. Next up, Sunken Citadel, another cave, this one choosing a color as it enters, and tapping for a mana of that color, or tapping for 2 mana of that color, but it can only be spent on abilities of lands. Love a land support land. And now for some gray frames, another land support land, Echoing Deeps, which can enter as a copy of any land in any graveyard, but it has Cave as a subtype in addition, and if it doesn't copy a land, it can still just tap for colorless. It also has a super cool borderless version. And for yet another land support land, Forgotten Monument. This is a cave that can tap for a colorless and gives other caves you control the ability to pay a life and tap for a mana of any color. And the land support lands just keep coming with Promising Vein, a cave fetch land that can tap for a colorless or for 1 generic, taps and sacks to search your library for a basic, put it in play tapped, and shuffle. And this might be a bit of a stretch, but we've got one more land support land, Volatile Fault, a cave that can tap for a colorless or pay 1 generic, tap and sack to destroy a target non-basic land an opponent controls and create you a treasure token. Then the controller of the destroyed land can search their library for a basic, put it in play, and shuffle. Moving on to the final land of the set, Cavernous Maw, a cave that taps for a colorless, or as long as you have at least 3 other caves on the battlefield or in your graveyard, you can pay 2 generic to transform it into a 3/3 elemental creature until end of turn. One of the benefits of a backlog set is I don't actually have to speculate about the usage of the cards, I just already have that information, and I can firmly tell you things like the hidden caves are super irrelevant to everything, seeing basically no play, and being a little bit more used in Commander than Standard, where the high mana cost is less of a big deal, but even then they sit at pretty low usage. And since this video is already pretty long, I'll try to gloss over a bit of the other irrelevant lands. Cavernous Maw is a weird man land that relies too heavily on caves. Similarly, Forgotten Monument is too heavily reliant on playing caves. Captivating Cave's third ability is quite costly for a pretty weak effect, making it basically a generic filter land. Echoing Deeps is one of the weakest land copying options. Promising Vein is a mediocre fetch land that is basically just ignored for better fetches like Evolving Wilds and Fabled Passage. Twists and Turns slash Mysoid Maze doesn't do anything unless you are exploring a lot, and then non-optionally transforms into a just okay land because the ability that finds creatures is decent but too pricey. Dowsing Device slash Geode Grotto transforms too quickly to get much value off of the front, and then as land just doesn't do enough to be useful in most situations. Grasping Shadows slash Shadow's Lair is slow and clunky at best, and even when it does transform, if you use all the counters, it pretty much reverts to being a non-basic basic. And Everflowing Well doesn't do anything after it's played except transform, which its ability that makes permanents copy other permanents usually isn't very useful since you lose something to get something else. With that all out of the way, let's move on to the relevant lands, with the smaller ones first, like Volatile Fault, which is decent land destruction and makes a treasure, so it's well suited for treasure decks in Commander, but doesn't really see much play in Standard. It's a bit of a small fry, but it's at least better than those other ones. Then Pit of Offerings, it's a bit more useful as graveyard hate than actually making mana, so it's more of a counter to certain matchups than something you just run normally, but it definitely serves its purpose decently well. Following that is a personal favorite, Sunken Citadel. This isn't really that useful in Standard because there's not a lot of things it can help out with, but in Commander decks where certain land abilities are integral to the strategy, like Maze's End, Academy Ruins, or Nykthos, this is really helpful. Or it goes really well with being able to use multiple smaller support abilities like Deserted Temple, Mistrise Village, or a Burgeon Zone off of a single tap. And maybe I'm a little biased to think it's better than it is because I just love lands so much, but it seems like a pretty helpful card for its niche of helping other lands. Tarian's Journal slash Tomb of Aclazotz is far more useful as a sacrifice outlet and card draw than anything else, so the actual land side doesn't see much play, but the artifact side sees plenty of play in lots of decks that like sacrificing creatures. Then Brass's Tunnel Grinder slash the hard to pronounce name is very helpful even in Standard, letting you just reset your hand or stack your graveyard, then turns into an extra land that even gets extra discovers. It's not a powerhouse, but it's still a solid backup option for certain situations. Thousand Moon's Smithy slash Barracks of the Thousand is a pretty decent token creature generator. It makes one on entry and even more as a land, but its somewhat costly and restrictive transformation makes it less desirable than it could be. Still, it's a nice addition to decks with lots of artifacts or that just really like making tokens. Then Mozzolantli the Great Door slash the Core is a very powerful card for graveyard-based decks, especially with other cards that care about permanent types in the graveyard like Muldrotha, the Gravetide, since it's able to get extra draw filter cards into your graveyard, and if transformed can potentially produce a lot of mana if the graveyard is set up right. This style of play is definitely a Commander thing though, so it doesn't really see much play in Standard. But the Restless lands actually do see Standard play. All 5 actually see pretty decent play because they have pretty decent stats and abilities for the cost of transforming, on top of just being dual-colored lands. You can still just use them as lands without ever transforming them. But you always have the option to transform them if the situation calls for it. But even though these all see some play, there are still some that are on top. Restless Reef, being a 4/4 with Death Touch and Mill 4, makes it a serious threat, and Restless Anchorage is a fairly well-used support card or combo piece in both Standard and Commander, having the cheapest transformation cost among the restless lands, along with having flying and making map tokens. As for the God Cycle, these have pretty solid usage in Commander, but are just ignored in Standard. They have somewhat high casting cost, and the creature sides are way more useful than the land sides, but a lot of the ways to transform back are a bit clunky, so they can definitely get stuck as lands, which means they're not especially worth it in Standard, except for one, more on that later. But these can provide some really nice value in Commander, especially the white one, which triples creature tokens, and has a pretty easy way to transform back. Now, the red one is relatively cheap to cast, and has a really great ability to power up all non-combat damage, as well as one of the easier ways to transform back, which means it actually does see both Standard and Commander play, even being a popular commander itself. But easily, the most impactful land in this set is actually a reprint instead of a new card. I usually don't really talk about reprints much in this section, but Cavern of Souls is an exception. Cavern of Souls is a super powerful land, making any color mana for no real extra cost, and making creatures uncounterable. It's super good typal support, and it being brought back into Standard was huge. This is a meta powerhouse that's seeing tons of play, and will until it's rotated out again. For Standard, this is like a 4 out of 5. Bringing back Cavern of Souls is huge, and introducing several lands that see decent meta play is very nice, although a lot of those don't actually see play as lands, so I gotta, take away a point. Definitely still worthy of a pretty high score, though. For Commander, this is also a 4 out of 5. This is pretty much the same thing. Several cards introduced are good in both, while several are better here, like the White God and Sunken Citadel, but some of those being better as the non-land side is a little bit of a disappointment for me, so I thought it deserves the same score as Standard. Theming here is like a 4 out of 5. It's pretty strong, there's lots of caves, tied-in mechanics, stylized art, but some of it feels a little muddled, like the kind of weird cycle of legendaries that includes a reprint, and maybe a colorless, and is all mismatched with different card types on the lands, or the Jurassic World cards being just a little bit out of place. So, good points, but not full points. For art, this is like an 8 out of 10. The art in this set is great, got some borderless, showcase, some really cool full art basics, and several extended arts. Although a lot of the extended arts aren't actually extended of the land, which is, again, pretty disappointing for me, so it loses a little bit there too. Bonus point for introducing subtype caves, and that gives it an overall score of 21 out of 25. That's a pretty high score for a pretty cool set. I really love a lot of what this set is doing, but it could do it just a little bit better, especially since a lot of these cards are better as non-lands than lands, which I've said it already a couple of times, but that's a little disappointing for me. If you've made it this far in the video, please drop a like for turn and subscribe for more land-filled content. If I missed anything, got anything wrong, or you just have questions, let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next backlog latest loadout with Wilds of Eldraine.